So we've overcome the shaky start. We got points on the board. Things are going in the right direction. Everyone's optimistic about what the future will hold. Things are only going to get better from here. But enough about talk on the Trinity and us getting the followers up and the podcast up and the quality of our content increasing and improving every week. We're going to have to talk about all things Villa now. I'm Baz Barrett. With me is Will Forrest, and we welcome you to the next in the series of Talk of the Trinity. Ordinarily, at the start of our weekly podcast, we would be doing a review of the game that's just gone. But for those of you lucky enough to be on Twitter, around about the hours of 8 to 8:30 p.m. on Monday, we did an impromptu live Villa Spaces recording about our thoughts on the Newcastle game, which, if you're unlucky to miss out on, we can summarise it quickly of, we were very happy, good things all round, we don't like Danny Murphy. And nothing really further to add, really, in terms of the Newcastle game in respect of what we were saying.
The only other thing I would add is that I am seriously considering making a Danny Ings Stan account. I love the bloke. He's fantastic. What a player and what a signing. That goal was it's probably the greatest home debut goal at Villa Park since Luke Nillis smashed that one in against Chelsea. I don't know if there's any others up there, you know. Yeah, what a player. Let's hope it just doesn't go the same way in regards to injuries. It's so nice to have two strikers who you think can do the business and two players you can rely on instead of one talisman. So Sky Sports tells you.
Yeah, I mean, the explanation from the club, or the justification, whichever word you want to use, in respect of the sale of Grealish was the individual cannot be replaced, but the team may be improved by the 3 signings we've had so far, hopefully maybe a couple more, using the funding. And yeah, when you got your centre forward who you've spent the money on producing things like that out of thin air, then yeah, it's a nice, satisfactory feeling.
It's phenomenal. I tell you, I'm going to predict this now, right? And we haven't discussed this before, but I'm going off on a whim, and I've been thinking this for the last few days, and I reckon most Villa fans will agree with me. Danny Ings gets 20 goals this season. I think he breaks that record. But I also think Danny Ings gets back into that England squad for the way that he's playing for us. And if Southgate overlooks him for the next couple of friendlies, after the start he's had, and after the start that Calvert-Lewin's had as well, and Greenwood in many ways, you'd think that those 3 would be the strikers that he'd take. I'd tell Harry Kane to forget it. But anyway, I'm digressing. I do apologise. But yeah, Danny Ings, England squad this year, hopefully goes to the World Cup, 20 goals.
Yeah, I can see him getting 20 goals. And I think if you're in that goal-scoring form as an England striker in the run-up to a World Cup, certainly worthy of being in the conversation. Be interesting to see what happens with Kane and where he goes over the next year or so. Southgate is generally pretty loyal to who he considers his key players, so if he's fit, I can't see Kane not being first choice. But if you've got Kane, Calvert-Lewin, Ings kind of as your focal point strikers, and then Greenwood, as you said, coming into form, Rashford, Sancho, Sterling, you know, it was a decent attacking set of players for the Euros, and can only continue to increase if we've got a couple more players in form for the World Cup. Just got to hope everybody stays fit.
Yeah, definitely. But anyway, we're not an England account, though we do like Ultimate Teams. And you brought our Ultimate Team to the forefront again during the last podcast when we reviewed the Watford game and we looked ahead to the Newcastle game. Do you want to just run over what the rules are or the picking that we're doing again, just for anybody who hasn't listened to the previous podcasts. And if you haven't, then we're not very happy.
But we can, or you can earn our forgiveness by going back onto the YouTube channel, go and have a look at the Twitter page for the link on to the previous episodes where we talked about the first player in our Ultimate 11. We started with a goalie. I mean, we're unique, but not that unique in terms of where we're going to start. We both had Bosnich in our Ultimate 11. We had some different views in terms of on the Twitter page. We had some views that agreed, some views that didn't. But, that's the good thing about the Twitter page. We're open to debate, open to Villa fans to put their viewpoints across. But in terms of the overall team structure, 11 players. Hopefully we won't get somebody sent off before we get to the end. Basically, we split Villa in the Premier League into roughly 3 chunks of 10. So you've got the 90s and early 2000s. So 92 to 2001-2002 season, we pick a couple of best players from that decade, and then we see if we can agree as to one that goes into the final, as it were, where they'll be up against a defender from the next 10 years, 2002-2003 to 2011-2012, and then a player from the final 10 years, 2012-2013 to the current season. And then we continue to put together our Ultimate 11. We put them onto the Twitter page, and the fans get to vote on the 3 finalists that we put from each decade, and we'll see how the teams differ from the end. Only real qualifying criteria, apart from they have to have played in that decade, is we don't count loan players. They get honourable mentions if they deserve honourable mentions, but they don't qualify to get to the final 11. They get a nice day out on the virtual field. They get to watch the lads run around, and they get, a mention in the programme. But you don't get onto the pitch, unfortunately. And speaking of getting onto the pitch, that moves us on to the position we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about centre-backs. We're going 4 at the back, so 2 centre-backs that we're going to be picking for our Ultimate 11s. And we're going to start in the 90s, early 2000s. So from that first 10 years of the Premier League, Will, which centre-back are you putting forward as your choice?
Mate, I'll be honest with you, it's quite an easy decision, really, when you look at all the centre-backs that we had from that period. I think I have to go, well, I don't think, I know I have to go with God himself, Paul McGrath. Paul McGrath, that number 5 for the Villa, who would man-mark Alan Shearer out of a game when he was pissed up to his eyeballs, didn't train all week because of his bad knees as well. Would pop up with the odd goal. I can remember him scoring against Tottenham in a 2-1 win with a nice low effort into the bottom corner through a crowded penalty area. But he just oozed class, didn't he, really? And the fact that he got PFA Player of the Year in that first Premier League season when football began just goes to show what his peers and what the footballing world thought of him. He was key in a back 2 with Sean Teal during the earlier Premier League years, and then when we went to that 5 at the back under Little, when he had Southgate and Ehiog alongside him, it goes to show that to this day, the whole end still sings songs about him. So I'm putting forward Paul McGrath, my lord, Paul McGrath.
In terms of the 90s, what I'd say is, surprisingly, there wasn't that many that I would have put forward, or there was fewer than what I thought in terms of, especially for that decade, we were known as being defensively sound. Probably the overall reputation was, defence good, attack, maybe not so much. Mm-hmm. Or we're not known as a free-flowing attacking team. But of those players who kind of made the initial shortlist, it's real tight competition, I think, in terms of the players from that era. I mean, you mentioned Paul McGrath winning Footballer Player of the Year in the first year of the Premier League. I mean, demonstrated what an achievement that was. Only 2 other centre-backs have won it in the Premier League era, John Terry, Virgil van Dijk. So the shiny lights of the striker or the attacking players often overshadow a solid defensive effort. And considering in terms of other teams have had overall better defensive records than that Villa team in the first season of the Premier League, and still probably haven't even made the shortlist, does demonstrate what a great first season that was for McGrath in the Premier League, and integral to that Villa team, so close to winning the title, wasn't to be. Won the League Cup next year, so he's part of one of the periods of, you could say, success in terms of Villa in the 30 years. I mean, you mentioned Sean Teal, probably cult hero really in terms of that partnership with McGrath. I mean, you weren't getting much change out of that, in terms of, and everybody who was there in the Tranmere semi-final second leg remembers the Teal goal, real character. And, in terms of still, well known, well respected kind of in the Villa area, and, always great to see him have his viewpoints and get involved in all things Villa, still cares about the club, which is, it's great. You don't get it all the time that players who leave Villa to have much of a interest in sticking around long term. But then I think the other 2, you mentioned in terms of the Brian Little era, 3 at the back, you got Gareth Southgate, Hugo Ekiog. Well, my 2 in terms of potential candidates for this. Obviously, Southgate comes in, captain for Villa, gets in the England team, stalwart of the Villa back line, for 5-6 years, plays in the cup final. Doesn't leave in the best circumstances in the world, which, similar to Ekiog actually. I mean, they both go to Middlesbrough and they both couldn't wait to get out of the place. But Ekiog, it took Ekiog a while to break into the first team. I mean, he joined from West Brom in 91, and so it wasn't really until 4 or 5 years later that he began to get a look in, really. But when he did, him and Southgate, that solid mid to late 90s combo at the back. And you've got a couple of players who kind of straddle the end of this first decade, start the second, who we'll maybe touch upon in the 2000s edit of it. But I'd say overall, in terms of the top 4, McGrath, Teal, Southgate, Ekiog, not necessarily in that order, but in terms of who you're picking from the 90s. So real tough call in terms of whether can you go against God? I mean, in terms of that brings a whole other list of theological, spiritual questions in terms of, can you deny the Lord? And, we'll leave that for everybody's own spiritual devotion to decide. But in terms of, I was going to say Southgate, but I think I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to give the edge to McGrath just because of that, I suppose, natural ability. I think in the end, just that natural ability to read a game. Southgate, I suppose, in terms of it's your classic Messi v Ronaldo argument. One has natural brilliance, the other has had to work really hard kind of every day, kind of through sheer perseverance to get to the top. That's how I'd compare it between McGrath and Southgate. So I think ultimately what side of the line you fall depends on which aspect you value more. But yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go for McGrath for the 90, but Southgate, honourable mention for me.
Well, should we, just thinking about this top of head, while we're still recording, should we pick 2 from each period because there's 2 players to pick overall, or should we go for 1 player from each period and then 1 bonus player or 2 bonus players and then pick our 2 centre-backs from that collection of 4 or 5 or 6 rather than just 2 out of 3?
So possibly we could have Gareth Southgate as a lucky loser, which he wasn't lucky in 96, but he could be in 2021 if we go with that system. Okay, so let's get McGrath through the first round, the first heat, and see when we circle back at the end whether Southgate makes it through as a lucky loser to the final pool of consideration for a spot in the centre-backs. Speaking of consideration for the centre-backs, we'll move on to the 2000s now. And in terms of players who you could say straddle the potential end of the first decade, start the second, I think the one that springs to my mind and who probably goes in, he's one of the top ones in terms of this decade. We'll start talking about first is Mellberg.
Yes.
For me, in terms of, it's one of the what-ifs, really, of recent Villa history, because I think in terms of who most fans would probably say was the best centre-back for Villa in this decade, who I haven't mentioned yet. If Mellberg was at his peak in that O'Neill defence just a few years later, it was a tasty defence already. But can you imagine Mellberg with his Scandinavian counterpart, who we haven't mentioned yet, but we will do in very short order? Wow, I mean, that's, a real kind of salivating prospect. And Mellberg, in terms of... Also, you can tell he was in the wrong era, because he knew you had to speak up before you played Blues, say how terrible they are. But unfortunately, he played with Villa in that only period where we kept losing. So he kept getting more and more kind of shamed every time he would, show how much he appreciated, anticipated the rivalry and still be on the losing team. If he was being able to do that when we were banging them 5-1, kind of later on.
He did play in that 5-1 game, if you remember. He played right back and he got subbed with about 2 minutes left. And there's that iconic picture of him in the 32 red shirt where he raises both his fists to the four stands of the crowd and everybody cheers for him.
I mean, he definitely deserved that moment. I mean, unfortunately, he wasn't there long enough, in terms of, that cup final team.
Yeah.
It's later on in that decade we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to go just for pure, kind of there through the bad times, grizzled kind of grit in terms of adversity, Mellberg's going up there. But I think in terms of, without wishing to put words in your mouth, I think I'm going to anticipate who your contender is going to be for this decade as to who you would have.
Yeah, well, I really liked Zat Knight. I thought he was great after he joined us from Fulham. No, it's not Zat Knight. He didn't do too badly for us, but he's not up here. Mellberg, I think, is a fantastic choice, mate. He had a shaky patch when he was at right back for a little while, because he played there for a few games. Did that lovely gesture when he left, gave us all a shirt that went to that 2-2 draw with West Ham. I got mine. Thanks, number 4, the support, is what I'm sure it said on the back. First ever goal scorer in a league match at the Emirates in that 1-1 draw. And popped up with some big goals for us over the years. And that beard as well was beautiful.
Yeah, well, I think many a man has tried to emulate that.
Yeah.
Maybe not just men. We're not going to narrow it. Great beard. That's where we're going.
And I'll be honest with you, he's hopefully one of the candidates for that John Terry role in regards to coming in now as a coach, as a defensive coach from Europe. But there's somebody else who's in those candidates, but we're not talking about him in regards to being shortlisted for Dino. We're talking about being shortlisted for our ultimate team, and it has to be the Danish warrior Martin No Knees Larsen. No offence, Martin. You were absolutely fantastic. What a player. He was as brave as Mellberg, if not braver. Put his head on anything. Captained the Villa, of course. Scored against Ajax with a bullet header. Scored a lot of other good goals. Fantastic at the last-ditch tackle with his floppy hair going everywhere. I remember him joining for 3 million from AC Milan and thinking, Martin Larsen? Why have we bought Martin Larsen? Why haven't we bought Maldini? Just because I think anybody would want to join the Villa. But what a player he was. And it was such a shame that he had those knee injuries that came about. I think it was only his third game, wasn't it? It was Charlton away when he hurt his knee for the first time. And we'd seen how good he was. And there was worry that he may not come back. But us at the Villa know how good defenders are that don't get to train all week because they've got dodgy knees from our previous experience with Paul McGrath. But Martin Larsson, what a leader, what a player. He could have played for any of the top teams in Europe if he'd have stayed fit, you know, and we're very lucky to have him. Apart from that, there's a few other players, as you mentioned before, a few that straddle the border of the two decades. You've got Nathan Baker played. I wouldn't say that he was an obvious choice. I wouldn't even say he was a choice, actually. But you had Richard Dunn and James Collins, who were brought back in along with Luke Young and Stephen Warnock to like transform that back line for Martin O'Neill, weren't they? And you had Carlos Cuellar, who came from Rangers, who I think he was a cult hero.
Quality player.
He was a quality player. And then, you know, to be honest with you, we had a few good players there. You had Zach Knight did a decent enough job for us. But Curtis Davies, I really rated Davies. And both of those signings pushed out Gary Cahill. And look what he went on to achieve. Everybody thought that O'Neill was bonkers, sending him for $5 million to Bolton.
And he was right. And people who thought that were right.
They were.
In terms of, I think, the Zach Knight player at Villa, I mean, he was a Villa fan, wasn't he? So I think for most Villa fans, you know, obviously they would want to play for their club. So it's difficult to kind of criticise him for that. And you can't criticise him because obviously it wasn't his decision to go and sell Gary Cahill or who played alongside him and who didn't. But for me personally, Zach Knight will always be, and even though he scored his debut against Chelsea, you know, a great goal, for me, Zach Knight will always be the player who we got instead of Cahill. And I think in terms of, you know, even Cahill, he had some great moments, you know, the goal against the Blues and that 5-1 win. I mean, we've managed to beat the Blues in twice. You know, you can tell we're up and running now on the podcast. Now we're getting victories over Blues into the conversation fairly regularly. But yeah, for me, Knight is that kind of what if, you know, in terms of Cahill, in terms of that overall, if he would have been in that back line for just a few more years, you know, if he would have been playing centre back when things really went wrong, kind of a few years later, I think we would have been in a slightly better place than what we eventually ended up being. But, you know, one of those, I would say what ifs. I think at the time it didn't seem like a great decision, and I think in hindsight it's only got worse. Richard Dunn, for me, I'd probably put him third in my list of centre-backs for that decade. I mean, you mentioned James Collins. James Collins, I'd say, he was the master of that last-ditch tackle that looked brilliant on the highlights reel. Unfortunately, it was usually his mistake that led to kind of the defender kind of having to scramble back to make that tackle. But, you know, he was committed, and you could tell he put his heart on his sleeve and tried his best, which, you know, you can't always say, you know, in terms of some players. And you got a couple more in terms of Ronnie Johnson was there for a couple of years. He was solid, you know, kind of near the start of that decade. That O'Leary success season, him and Dion Dublin's centre-back partnership, I mean, that was, you know, what a... Trying to explain that to anybody under the age of 30 and then they played centre-back for Villa is quite something.
Do you remember that game where they played Everton and Dion Dublin marked Wayne Rooney out of the game? It was a 0-0 draw, and it's the only time I've gone to Villa Park and I can't remember any of the match, apart from the ball getting kicked out for a throw-in. I mean, it was awful. I
mean, in terms of a 0-0 draw in the end of October, where basically nothing happened, really, apart from Rooney getting marked out of the game. But in terms of, if I had to write down a list of probably, you know, 20, 30 Villa matches that I could, you know, remember as being unique or kind of had something to say in some way, it's getting probably on the bottom, kind of the 20 or 30, which, considering nothing happened, demonstrates, you know, what a great job we did shutting down Wayne Rooney. And, you know, just because he turned up in a local pub to us and, you know, kind of came through the youth system, going to throw Liam Ridgewell. He gets a mention, you know, in terms of, even though he tried to complete the set, in terms of playing for the local clubs who weren't Villa. But probably the the heyday decade in terms of potential candidates for the ultimate team. So, in terms of your pick for the 2000 centre-back, going Larson?
Do you know, it's difficult. It's between the two of them. It's between Larson and Mellberg. And, you know, you point out there, Duncan Collins did okay. I preferred Quayer over the two of them. I liked his song, to be honest with you. Ridgewell, I remember him coming in and that tackle he did in the 2-0 win against Fulham on Super Sunday, edge of the box, 2-footed, straight onto the ball, knocked Louis Saha flying, and it sounded like a bomb had gone off in the stadium. But yeah, anyway, digressing. I'm gonna agree with you. I'm gonna go for Mellberg as well, over Larson. And the reason for that is basically down to fitness, really. Mellberg played a lot more games for the Villa. He also captained them. He was there for longer. And those are the reasons why I'd edge him over Larson. It'd only be by something of a percent.
But as we've touched upon when we were going on the 90s, Larson could get through as a lucky loser. So he could still make the team. Yeah. So, you know, we'll have to see how that progresses. And we've gone from an abundance of fullback. We've gone from an abundance of centre-backs, I should say, in the 2000s to slightly less to choose from the last decade. There's a bit of an insert scene here for the most of this decade in terms of centre-backs. But in terms of your 2010 choice, who are you going for?
Well, you know, we're also including the championship years in this, and it's a shame in some ways that we can't include loan players. Not that I think this player was the best, but just a quick nod to Axel Tuanzebe because he's been fantastic. He was even brilliant on Saturday in the minute that he played in centre midfield. For me, with this one, you know, it's difficult. There's hardly anybody to choose from, like you say, really, that are any good. But when we do our I wish they hadn't played for the Villa or whatever 11 it will be in the future. What a great period to choose from, really. Yep. For me, and I don't think you'll agree with this, it's between two players, really, for me. I won't touch upon the one in case you mention them. But the player who I'm going to nominate is the current Aston Villa captain. I'm going to go with Tyrone Mings. It's 3 years. 2.5 years, and then this year that he's been at the club. I appreciate the first bit was loan in the Championship, and when we signed him, I thought, what? We'd beaten Nottingham Forest in the race to sign him. We should just let him go there. We don't need a left back. We didn't need a left back. Dino's played a blinder and put him in at centre back, and he made that tackle on his first game where he ripped open somebody's face like Freddy Krueger jumping out of your nightmares type of a thing. And he's been a colossal force ever since then. We're talking about on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. He seems like a great bloke. You know, he's proactive in the local community. When he joined Villa, he set up his Tyrone Mings Academy, local to the area. And he also challenges topics that should be challenged and that you want high-profile people to challenge, such as the taking of the knee, you know, during the Euros. And you feel an overwhelming sense of pride when you see that it's Tyrone Mings who's articulating the thoughts of, you know, the country, really, when standing up for these sorts of things. And it makes you proud that he's your captain. I don't think there was anybody else that could have taken over from Grealish, really, but there were. But he was just the natural choice. Yes, he has a mistake in him, but as I said before on a previous podcast, every player has a mistake in them. He's 100% every game. He will attempt to atone for his mistakes. he will come out and he'll admit where he's done something wrong or where he could have done better. Very active on social media with Villa fans as well. He scored some very important goals for us, put in some amazing tackles, and you saw last year in those empty stadiums, or you heard last year in those empty stadiums, just how vocal he was and how key and important he was to the team. And I think that was really highlighted in the 3-2 away defeat to Palace when he didn't play and there was hardly any talking on the pitch. I still think he's one of the first names on the team sheet at the moment. He's, 27, 28 years old. I think he's a mainstay for years to come unless we go out and spend bigger money on a better defender, because there are better defenders than him. But in regards to Villa, in regards to this 10-year period, my man is Tyrone Mings.
I would agree that in terms of for this decade, there's only really two you could go for, and he is one of them.
Yeah.
Perfectly, as you touched upon there, arguably the only pick out of the centre-backs whereby if you're going just on pure ability, he probably wouldn't be there, because as you've mentioned, he's got a mistake in him, but he is probably the candidate out of all of them who we've mentioned. All the other stuff that he brings to the field, to the table, far outweighs that. I remember in terms of when we signed him permanently, apart from that promo we cut way in at Aston train station.
Amazing.
You're kind of thinking it was like 25 million, and people were going, he's not worth 25 million, he's not good enough to justify 25 million. Look at all those other players who are technically better than him. For that Villa team in that particular period, he was almost priceless because of what he brought. And, you mentioned some of the things that he brings, that organisational spirit, that leadership. Even when he wasn't captain, he's the one organising from the back, galvanising the team. In terms of, you usually have two different ways you can go with captains. You pick your best player, or you pick the one who's the most natural leader.
Yep.
Grealish was captain because he was the best player. In terms of technical ability, in terms of pure footballing ability. We touched upon it previously. Arguably the best player in a Villa shirt seen in my lifetime. Whether that's good enough to get him into a midfield spot, find out later on in the series. But Mings, he's there because he is the leader. I think he was, as you said, the only choice really to be captain. The best choice available, commands respect. I mean, you could arguably say he's not the best defender in our current back two in terms of technical ability, but he brings a lot more to the table. It's not just who is technically the best. There's a lot more to it in terms of footballing ability, and he has grown, I think, as a player, and also more, as you touched upon there, really grown as a person, really, kind of in the last few years, and I think that only reflects well on the club, and will only continue to take Villa in positive ways. And, long may it continue, really, in terms of him at the club. So I would say in terms of, it's a choice of two, but I think he's probably the clear front runner for the decade. But the other one I'd throw in terms of that top two, James Chester, for me. I mean, unfortunately, he was injured pretty much for the entirety of the season. We got promoted, but those couple of years where he was the mainstay of that defence, when things weren't always going the best that they could have done during our time in the Championship, good signing for us at the time, decent value, and it's just unfortunate really for him in terms of he got injured when he did. Time moved on, he couldn't get back into the team, but natural leader in his own way. And I think in terms of, even though it wasn't perhaps the most successful period in our history, it would have been a lot worse if he wouldn't have been there, because we had other defenders who we spent money on and didn't work during that period for whatever reasons, changing the managers, changing the systems, changing the emphasis perhaps, but we've had Steve Bruce in charge for most of the period where Chester was a mainstay in the team, and there's lots of things you could say about Bruce, positive and negative, but a defensively minded manager needs good defensive players, and with Chester, Bruce certainly had that.
Oh, definitely. And again, when he joined, I thought, oh, James Chester, what are we buying him for? Which, it is a running theme now. But what a signing by Bobby Di Matteo. And his first game for the Villa was that 3-0 win against Rotherham. He led by example, like you're saying. I think he goes to show he scored some valuable goals for us. I remember him scoring in the 4-1 win against Wolves. But he put his body on the line to the point where he played through injuries, and ultimately it nearly ended his career. And it's nice to see that he's still managed to get a move out of it to one of the better Championship sides, really, when you look at things on paper in Stoke. But you could tell how much his peers thought of him by them wanting him to be there to raise that playoff trophy alongside Jack Grealish at the time. He was still club captain. It is a shame that he never really got any appearances in the Premier League for us. Really only coming in cup games during that season again because of injury. Because he was someone that the Villa fans loved, very much like the other centre-backs we've discussed. He had a connection with the fans, and the fans saw everything that he brought and put on the line. And he's got the whole injuries thing with centre-backs, at the Villa.
I mean, if only we had more centre-backs we could keep fit. I mean, we would, we'd be able to play 8 centre-backs at one time and no one's getting past us. A few, I'd say honourable mentions, some are more honourable than others that I had in terms of the early part of this last 10-year period. Ron Vlaar comes in, 3 million. He was trying to tie that defence together with string. And, in terms of that run to the FA Cup final, especially the semi-final, great performance there. And then, another example of acrimonious departures, really. So doesn't really get too much favour in terms of Villa fans looking back. But 3-year contract in a team that wasn't very good. It was one of the better performances, which perhaps isn't particularly saying very much.
His goal against Sunderland as well in that 6-1 win.
Yep,
was a bit of a rocket, but Ron, do one.
Kieran Clark often played alongside Ron Vlaar, came through the youth system. I think he was a trier. I think in terms of solid. You're getting 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 most games. Obviously, currently in Newcastle, seeing him come back last week. Not the type of player you're looking back, talking about Cahill, in terms of players you look back at and go, oh man, I can't believe we sold him. Why didn't we sell him?
Yep.
Don't look back at Clark really and go, oh man, what if? Really? And he's a solid player, but that, solid is for the last 10 years good enough to get you a mention kind of in here, really.
Yeah.
And then I suppose bringing it slightly more towards the modern day, John Terry, there for a year. I remember when we signed him, most well-paid player in second tier in the world, and you're there thinking, really? I mean, he's kind of, all I remember from the last couple of years was him wearing like full kit, regardless of whether he was playing or not. And then, that 26-minute substitution, his last Chelsea game, you're like, is he really worth 60 grand a week, whatever we paid him? And, objectively, you can make your own decision on that. But I'll admit he was a lot better than what I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to get injured after about 3 weeks and just collect the money for the rest of the year and not do a lot. And he was there as a mainstay of that defence, and he could barely run by the end, but he didn't need to. A bit like McGrath, kind of bringing it full circle. Wow, kind of the anticipation and the organisation of the defence. It was only a year, but he was decent, and then obviously he had a longer spell as a coach, and you could tell in terms of after lockdown and those last 10, 11 games of the season where we tightened up defensively, you'd have to think that he deserves some credit for that in terms of being the defensive side of the head coaching system. Then mentioned in terms of earlier, Mings not been the best back two in terms of Villa at the moment. The other one's Esri Konsa, in terms of great player. I think outside shot of the Euro squad potentially should have been in there.
Yeah.
But, it's just... that partnership demonstrates why you need somebody like Mings, because Konsa's, I think, is technically better. He's not particularly loud kind of on the field. He just does his job, efficiently, a little bit of skill. Mings is the one barking orders. That combination works quite well. And, playing centre-back is all about partnerships, which is why in terms of some of the players we've mentioned going into the potential ultimate 11, they've had the benefit of playing with somebody alongside them who's lifted them up and been able to allow them to play in a natural game. So Mings and Konsa in that centre-back partnership currently, they both really do complement each other really well. And, great signings by Dean Smith.
Definitely. I agree. John Terry as well, interesting fact, which I'm sure all Villa fans probably know. But the highest ever home crowd that he played in front of was when he was at the Villa, when we sold out against the Blues with it being 42,000 or whatever. Chelsea didn't have that many fans, so highest was with us. He was a great leader. He was just what we needed at that time, and it was a shame that he didn't get us promoted the season after. But in hindsight, is it a good thing, because he'd have wanted to play on in the Premier League, wouldn't he? But he didn't want to play at Chelsea or against Chelsea, which would have caused problems. You have, I'm trying to think of ones. Chris Samba, the man mountain for us.
Yeah. I mean, my only abiding memory of Chris Samba is I think we were playing... I can't even remember who it was. And we were 2 down at home and absolutely dreadful. I left before... One of the only times we ever left a game before the end, because there were issues with the trains, and I was like, sod this. All I remember is hearing that Chris Samba scored in injury time.
Yep.
That's basically my Villa memory of Chris Samba, and I wasn't even there to see it.
We had Bjorn Engels, who obviously started off very well for those first few months, hit the post in the cup final as well, and then it all went downhill after lockdown for him. I mean, there were talks that he had a falling out with Dino on the training field, but who knows? I mean, he didn't say the nicest of things after leaving. No.
That goal that wasn't in the cup final, if we would have dragged that to extra time, especially after the first half where we were absolutely played off the park for the first 30, 40 minutes, and it could have been like 3 or 4-0, would have been interesting to see how City would have dealt with that, having had enough opportunities to win 2 or 3 games. One of those moments, I was in the crowd, you see it come across, you see it hit the head, you're jumping up because you're like, this is going in, there's no other way, and then 2 seconds later, you're like, why isn't the ball in the net? Yeah. What's happened? So, unfortunate for Engels, that was pretty much the end, really, of his Villa career, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some awful centre-backs as well. I mean, Mr. Pocket Tweeter, Jolie Lescott, Micah Richards was a centre-back. I don't blame Richards. I don't think he was as bad as he was made out to be, but he wasn't a centre-back, was he? He should have been more of a right-back. Again, injuries in keeping with Villa defenders.
I think that was it, really, with Richards. He was just shot, kind of really injury-wise. It's a shame, really, because I think a fit Richards in the Championship could have been an asset, especially in that first season. But just unfortunately, as you said, injuries kind of put an end to that, really. And I think Richards at centre-back, could it have worked? Possibly. Was it going to work when the whole system was crumbling around him in terms of especially during that second half of the season where we came bottom? Yeah, I mean, you're taking a real risk. I mean, in terms of he came in when he did at the time thinking, man, that's a great signing. Fortunately, just didn't work out. I mean, I don't think he goes down in that team as one of the worst. I mean, you mentioned somebody else who probably, in terms of that defence, probably goes down a bit worse. But yeah, it was slim pickings, really, for that decade.
I mean, remembering that as well, that same summer we signed Jose Angel Crespo, who only ever started 1 game for us, and that was a 1-0 defeat against Stoke. He would have been worse than Richards. He left after about 6 months, I think. Kevin Toner had a run of games and he looked half decent, but whoever it was came in, didn't fancy him, and he went and joined St Pat's, I believe. Yours Akore was promising. Scored our first goal for about 624 years at one point. I remember, I think it was 4 matches, or it had been a month, and he scored a header against Chelsea. And there was a picture saying, in the time it's taken Villa to score, Steve Bruce has ate 10,000 sausage rolls. That was something I remember.
So weak then.
Yeah. Derek Williams, who went on to join Blackburn or Bristol City.
I think Bristol City, from recollection. We're scraping the barrel here.
Yeah, Courtney Howes as well.
Solid.
Decent. Tommy Elphick didn't do too badly for us. I don't think he had much opportunities after. He just got dropped, didn't he? But when he played at centre-back for that one period alongside Mile Jedinak in the season that we got promoted, he was very unfortunate to get dropped again when Mings and Howes were both fit. But, yeah, I mean, for me, I'd go Tyrone Mings.
Yeah, so I think in terms of overall for the decade, that's who I'd probably go for as well. So we've got, in terms of, if we're kind of picking the top 2 going all the way back for those 3 decades, we had McGrath, Southgate, Mellberg, Larsson, Mings, Chester. Got to get 6 into 2. Are there any of those names who you're taking off the shortlist straight away?
Yeah, 2 of them. Unfortunately, I feel sorry to be taking off the shortlist James Chester. Don't feel so bad about Gareth Southgate. Bog off. Right, you're done. And I'd leave it with the other 4. Mings wouldn't get into the 2 for me either, but I like him, so I'll keep him there at the moment.
So I mean, we gotta be ruthless. So Mings is gone. So we're down to 3 now. So we've got McGrath, Larsson, Mellberg. Who's making your final 2?
For me, it's got to be Paul McGrath. Makes it for what he achieved at the club. Won 2 League Cups with us. Also won that PFA Writers or whatever it was Player of the Year in the first year. One of only 3 defenders, as you say, 2 of which have played for Villa, to win that. And then alongside him, really, because, and it sounds a little bit contradictory after I picked Paul McGrath, but due to the injuries he had, I would have to pick Olaf Mellberg over Martin Larsson. So yeah, I'd go with Mellberg and McGrath.
I think I would agree with you. I can see, especially the Mellberg v Larsson pick being real controversial, but for me personally, I just personally like Mellberg more. Just like on a
bought me a shirt, I like him more.
Yeah, I mean, he bribed you to get in the team, so that's fine. He's got a great beard, so that was something I've aspired to for my whole adult life and have failed. So I admire somebody who can do that. But yeah, I think just in terms of character, really, I'm not saying Larsson doesn't have character, because obviously, he had to get through O'Leary kind of making him do like 20 laps of the field when his knees had been shot. So you kind of need character for that. And one of the what ifs of Villa history of Larsson would have been able to play a few more seasons. And I think mentioned his goal against Ajax. I think that is the last knockout. Or was that in the group stage we played Ajax?
That was the group stage, yeah.
No, I mean, it's one of those iconic moments in terms of one of the last games we won in Europe, in terms of, in a kind of the main stage of the tournament, as it were. So we've always got those memories. But yeah, I think I'd go Mellberg. I mean, in terms of also slight versatility of playing right back, even though probably wasn't very good in the grand scheme of things there. But we're constructing these arguments to get him in the team. So
his celebration against the Blues as well, when we won, and how we just mugged them off, also makes him captain of the team. No, it doesn't make him captain of the team. Don't know who that would be, maybe Jemba. But
I mean, he definitely gets him in just for those two. So we're going McGrath and Melberg, and we're 3 from 3 in terms of agreeing so far. I mean, we'll see if this continues, and we'll also see. We'll put all the options up on the Twitter page for the fans, and we'll see whether the 100% record of the fans not agreeing with us continues.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll put it on as a vote for you, as I did before. But this time, because there's 2 people to pick from, it will be the top choice will get the first centre-back spot out of the 4 players that we narrowed it down to. I'll add Tyrone Mings into that as well. And then whoever comes second, third and fourth, I'll put them into their own one, because we're trying to pick our main person. And then whoever gets the most votes in that second poll, then those will be your centre-halves, and they'll be playing in front of Emi Martinez, whereas ours are playing in front of Bozzy.
Man, 2 rival dynasties building up in front of your very eyes. So keep an eye out for the Twitter page. We'll get the polls up, and we'll see what you, the fans, put down as your vote.
Yeah, nice one. Sound.
Right, so we've talked about the past with our Ultimate 11. Now we're going to cast our eye towards the future and preview Saturday's game against Brentford. At time of recording, we haven't had the cup game yet against Barrow, so we've got our preview podcast already up in terms of Barrow. You'll hear some reaction from us during the course of the week, where we'll be celebrating, commiserating, whatever happens on the day, hopefully in the former category. So with that caveat in mind as regards what may happen on Tuesday in terms of injuries, or whether we do manage to put some money on the table for a new signing or 2, possibly before Saturday, what are your general thoughts about Brentford? What are you thinking about their start to the season?
Oh, they've done very well to start with their start of the season, haven't they? You know, I mean, Arsenal are no real easy team to beat. I mean, they're not the Arsenal of old, but you sort of feel that if they'd have had Odegaard in during pre-season, they may have fared a little bit better in how they've done. But you've asked me about Brentford anyway. Great result against Arsenal, that 2-0 win. Not surprising, really. First game in the Premier League, first game with a full house in their new stadium as well. They did very well, you know. They took advantage with the set piece for the second goal, and then they got a good solid point away against Palace. You know, you're going to be, for a new team that's come up, you're probably thinking you want to beat the teams that are in the lower half of the Premier League when you play your home games. Get a few wins against some of the teams in the top half, if not draws. And you're going to really be aiming for draws away. But this Brentford team, they seem to want to take the game to the opposition. And Palace are a well-established Premier League team now. Okay, they've got a new manager and a few new signings as well. But I think a 0-0 draw and going 2 games without conceding is good for a newly promoted team.
Yeah, I mean, what I say about Brentford's start is that obviously you had all the emotion for all sorts of reasons their first game against Arsenal. Arsenal weren't quite up to full strength. When the starting lineups came out, you're like, you fancy them here. I think in terms of Brentford, I mean, we're talking about set pieces in the build-up to this game, pure off the training ground. Their second goal in terms of that long throw. Hopefully our set-piece coach will be able to teach us to defend in a bit better than Arsenal did. But a lot of the talk about Brentford was, as you said, more about the attacking play. Tony up front, a lot of people were tipping for a good season. Got Canos, who scored Brentford's first goal in the Premier League. Yeah. He's done a good job in the Championship for the last few years, and thinking, can he take the next step up? Early signs look encouraging from a Brentford perspective. But the big thing for Brentford, I think, which maybe taking some people by surprise, but not necessarily if you're watching them at the end of the Championship season, that defence, they kept 2 clean sheets to start the season, 8 clean sheets out of the last 10, if you're kind of going back towards the end of last season. And usually with newly promoted teams, there's that feeling of they're going to concede goals. Have they got enough up front to be able to counteract it? And, looking back, the most obviously crazy example that springs to mind is when Blackpool got promoted. Yeah. They scored 50-odd goals, but they conceded 80-odd. So in terms of, you're not going to stay in the league. I mean, they gave it a good go, and they're in the last game of the season, having to get a result at Old Trafford, and they nearly did it. But just think, after conceding 10 less goals, then they would have perhaps stayed up by a point. So in terms of the contrast to that, you had Middlesbrough came a few years ago who just didn't score under Karanka. They had a change of manager, and then they just conceded loads, and then that was, the final nail in their coffin. So getting that balance is important, but in terms of cliches 101 in football, if you don't concede goals, you don't lose games. And I think that's going to be the underestimated element of Brentford, and whether they can keep that up. I mean, in terms of, they've got friend of the Villa, Pontus Jansson at centre-back, he's one of those players who you'd think does a job in the Championship. Is he going to be good enough for the Premier League? Is he going to be able to step up? Maybe in similar, not in any way to Mings in terms of overall impact, but, a character, a leader, you could say maybe that for this Brentford back line. I mean, he fell out of favour at Leeds fairly sharpish after that incident, shall we say, which we'll probably touch upon in other episodes of the podcast. So I think in terms of the expectation for the Brentford game, thinking, there's a team who's just going to come and attack us, and then, if we just pick them off because they're going to be naive at the back, I don't think that's going to be true. They've demonstrated that they're very solid. And in terms of Palace, draw on the road, better team, I think, than Palace. I think my own view of what Palace is going to do this season, I think they'll look back and go, yeah, we've probably 2 points dropped perhaps rather than one game. But, you're trying to establish yourself in the Premier League early on in the season, and you're not losing games, you're not conceding goals, you're unbeaten. I mean, Tony had a couple of chances, a couple of headers perhaps, on a different day, one of those goes in, you get the result. So not underestimating Brentford. I think they are going to be defensively resolute, and I think that's going to be the key to the game for Villa in terms of, obviously, another home crowd. Expectations are going to be high after winning against Newcastle, newly promoted team. The expectation, we're just going to go and hit them, and that's going to be, with 2-3 up at half time. Danny Ings, just has to look at the ball and it's going in from 50 yards. I think we're going to have to play it clever. I think it's, I don't think it's going to come easy. I think we're going to have to almost play the crowd almost as much as Brentford. And I think we could be 0-0 after an hour. And then it's going to be, hopefully, that little bit different from the bench, perhaps that little bit of extra experience, because that's, funnily enough, you look at it in terms of the Arsenal team they played, a lot of inexperience in that Arsenal team. Palace, inexperience at the manager side of it, a few players for Palace trying to bed themselves down. That experienced head, Ings, Mings, not deliberately rhyming, but we've kind of got that little bit of Premier League nous, McGinn, and I think that could potentially make the difference. So just keeping it on the level, I think, is going to be key to deciding how this game goes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Brentford have surprised us in some ways with how well they've done defensively because of it being a step up into the Premier League. But when you look at their form defensively towards that back end of last season, then, you're spot on with that. There's one area of the pitch that I worry about with the Villa, and that is defensively. And the reason for it is I just feel that up against quicker players, we lack a little bit and we could get caught out. I mean, you look at Watford and Sarr, who ripped us a new one down that wing. Callum Wilson got away from Tyrone Mings a couple of times as well. Granted, the second one with the foul was offside, but he should really have been putting Newcastle 1-0 up before then when he got through. But as you say, Ings, Mings, McGinn's, all those other players. We've got that experience there. And I think that will see us over the line. The crowd do have to be patient and support the team all the way through it, because there will be some hairy moments with Brentford running at us. I remember vividly playing Swansea when they first came up and they smashed us 3-0. Nathan Dyer, Wayne Routledge and Michu absolutely kicked the crap out of us. And, you know, the Villa fans on that day were upset. I think we're a different set of fans now. Whilst we have expectations and we want to be pushing for Europe, I think they will still stay behind the lads if they went a goal down. But we definitely do need them there to help us across the line. Brentford are going to be a tough cookie. They're going to be a lot tougher now than they would have been playing them in November or December, you know, when they've bedded into the league a bit and you've managed to watch a lot of their games and they've tasted defeat when they felt that maybe they should have got something. I'm confident though. I'm confident about the result. I think we end up taking maximum points.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make in terms of playing them early on in the season, whilst confidence is still high, is more of a danger than perhaps playing them in the depths of winter, whereby perhaps there's a few injuries, maybe there's been a few defeats, maybe confidence is a little lower. And I think in terms of you mentioning the defence as potentially being our weak point, I think Brentford have the possibility of causing us problems with the shape they play. You can call it 3 at the back or 5 at the back, playing wing backs.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility of an overload situation on either flank, really. I mean, they're most likely they're going to have Henry going up the left, Canos, in terms of our left, and perhaps in terms of on one side, Canos on the other side. In terms of Canos against whoever's playing left back, I mean, Target or Young, you'd expect different problems. I think you mentioned lack of pace. That's probably going to be more Young's problem. If we're playing Target, Canos is tricky, you know, in terms of he offers different problems to Sarr did on the opening day, but maybe a bit of confidence lacking. It doesn't take much to exploit that, perhaps. So I think that's what we've got to watch in terms of not getting overloaded on the defensive flanks. You know, making sure that you think we'll be playing a variant of 2 deeper players, perhaps with McGinn if he's fit, pushing further forward, and one perhaps sitting. Need to make sure we don't get overloaded in midfield. Make sure we're alive to that threat. But I agree with you in terms of I'm confident we can get a result here. I think it's going to be a tight game. I don't think we're going to roll them over. I think they're going to be more of a threat than Newcastle were, frankly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see it being 0-0 at half time, and us, the pressure kind of telling if we keep it clever, keep doing what we're doing, not getting kind of panicked by the fact that Brentford, oh my God, they can actually play football in a promoted team and they can defend. I can't believe that. Dean Smith obviously has the personal knowledge of some of the characters at Brentford, which will hopefully be of assistance to us. But in terms of a score prediction, I'm going to jump in with mine. I think we win 1-0.
Okay. I think it's 1 goal. I have been thinking 2-2 all week. All of last week I was thinking 2-2. I think we win 2-1. And yeah, I touched upon before about the defence and the pace. I think that's really only a problem when they counter-attack us. If they can slip those balls through to Ivan Toney and he can get away from Konsa or Mings. Martinez was quick to come off his line against Newcastle quite a bit.
Bit too quick on occasion.
Yeah, he was a bit rash, wasn't he, with the one. But looking at some of the other bits in the game, when St Maximin got the ball, Ashley Young was on him when he was getting it out wide. And he had the support of Anwar El Ghazi as well. And the Villa players then seemed to do a bit of prime Barcelona in regards to marking the spaces between the players where the ball could be passed rather than standing on the player and letting them run off them. And I think Ashley Young and Anwel El Ghazi have got quite a nice understanding down that left-hand side, and long may that continue. I like Matt Targett. He did very well in the empty stadium era. I wonder whether there's a bit of correlation there, to be honest with you, because the first year when we had fans, he was a little bit shaky. But yeah, I think Young's going to be left back here for quite a while, you know. I don't think he gets pushed out of the way. But a 2-1 win. I'm going to go again and say that my brand new favourite Villa player, Danny Ings, scores for us. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tony open his account or even Pontus Jansson score against us. But I do think we go 2-0 up. I think it's 2-0 Villa. They score and make it a little bit nervy at the end. I think Jacob Ramsey scores his first Villa goal and he gets it in front of the whole end. He looked a class act against Newcastle. He's beefed up a bit. He's confident. I think he got 82% pass accuracy against Newcastle and 100% dribbles. He likes to play on the front foot. And if him and McGinn can link up, as you've mentioned, and if we can exploit those wing-backs with El Ghazi, Bundia, even McGinn pulling out wide at times as he did against Newcastle. If Watkins is there, Watkins is going to put that high press on, and hopefully we get to see a little bit of Leon Bailey. You know, those as a front three, they're going to cause teams problem, and they're going to cause, and no disrespect, but they're going to cause better teams than Brentford problems as well.
Yeah, I think especially when everybody's fit, everybody's up to speed. I think after the international break, certainly, if everybody can get through that unscathed, then the future is looking bright in terms of what Villa are going to be able to do. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll be in the Holt on Saturday, so if Ramsey does get his first goal in front of the Holt, I would be very much looking forward to that. I mean, I think in terms of team predictions, maybe we do those for the fans closer to the game, you know, put them out on Twitter, perhaps maybe a live, you know, kind of voice note, you know, maybe we'll, you know, see what happens in terms of the Barrow game tomorrow, see, hopefully nobody gets injured, particularly touch wood. But yeah, I mean, I think we're both feeling fairly positive about the game, and I think, you know, as I think we've both said, we keep playing our game, we've got the players to cause problems and stick to the game plan. Dino knows what he's doing. Hopefully we go into September, 2 wins out of 3, 100% home record.
Yep.
Couple of signings, hopefully, before the transfer window. We'll have our say on that, perhaps in the next week or so. And onwards and upwards, really. Yeah,
definitely. I think, like you say, you know, we have to play our game. And if we start with those same 3 that played against Newcastle in centre midfield, you've got Douglas Luiz and Ramsey who know how to pass a football, know how to play football as well. And you've got John McGinn, who's like a bull in a china shop. He'll just go and rattle anybody with that arse, you know, and go and win the ball. And he's a danger. He pops up with a goal every now and again. It's an interesting few weeks ahead without spoiling any future episodes. You know, the internationals are coming up, which are always boring, aren't they, really? You know, unless Danny Ings is playing, of course.
Him and Watkins up front.
Him and Watkins and Mings in defence, you know. Jacob Ramsey in there as well. If he isn't, and Ashley Young isn't, then I'll be disappointed along with Matty. Any English Villa players. The one worry, and we'll mention this in a future episode, probably pre-Chelsea, is the fact that Argentina have called up our 2 Emmys because of the whole lockdown restrictions or self-isolation after they get back from Argentina, potentially missing Chelsea and Everton, and also Man United if they haven't had enough time to train, but that's something to look forward to in the future.
The preview podcast for those games are just going to be two quite worried, depressed 30-something men talking, I think, for a while if we can't get those two on the pitch.
But quietly optimistic that we'll win 1-0 with a fluky goal at the end.
We've always got to be optimistic.
Yeah, definitely. Providing we've got Danny Ings, we're going to be just fine.
Yeah, and if Villa have got Danny Ings, we'll be fine. If you've got the premium content of talk of the Trinity, wherever you want to talk about the Trinity, get us on your listening devices on YouTube. What are those social media details, Will?
So it's talk of the Trinity, but we could do talk on the Trinity if we had a chat at the Trinity.
So you're in the Trinity on Saturdays.
I am, yeah. I'll be sharing content. That'll be talk on the Trinity on a Saturday while Baz is doing talk on the Alt. Alt with a capital O. So you've got our Twitter page. That's at Talk Trinity. There's no on or of for you to worry about. It's at Talk Trinity.
Good news for me.
And then you've got our YouTube page, which you're obviously listening to now, but that's Talk of the Trinity. There's a little subscribe button in that bottom left-hand corner. We would appreciate it a lot if you subscribed to the channel. Likes or unlikes are welcome as well, as are comments if there's anything you want us to look at over that international break, though we do have a few international villains lined up for that period. And if you're not following us on Twitter yet, then what the hell are you playing at? Get on there. We got polls, we got pictures, we got loads of Danny Ings stuff as well.
Yeah.
We're on there, as we said, at Talk Trinity. Give us a follow. We'll follow back. We'll do some Villa Spaces as well, as we did pre-Barrow, where we aim to get one person listening at a time, which is, something that if we don't hit that, we might cry about a little bit. But those are our platforms. If there's anything that you want us to discuss Villa-wise, anything you want to ask us for our opinion on, whilst we'll also ask you for yours as well, then just hit us up, ask away, but don't forget to like, subscribe and follow.
And just think, you could be the person that puts us to 1,000 followers on Twitter. What higher honour could you possibly have? You'd have that, you'd have the Villa content. I mean, I'm struggling to think of anything better for your day when that happens. But whilst we leave you to ponder that, we're going to leave you. And just to say, thanks very much for listening. Appreciate everybody sharing, liking, listening. Spreading it to your friends. Spreading it to your enemies. I mean, we're getting the numbers up. Thanks for listening, and we'll be with you again soon. Cheers.
Cheers, Tara. Thank you very much. Up the Villa.
Gotta fall first to pick yourself